Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of the Influence Economy podcast. I'm your host, Shayna Davis. I'm so glad that you're here today. But before we get started, I want you to do me a favor. So, wherever it is that you are listening to this episode, I want you to take a screenshot. And with that screenshot, I want you to post it on LinkedIn and tag me. And then I just want to hear your biggest aha moment or your biggest takeaway from this episode. And the reason why I ask you to do that is because I think that there's just way too many leaders that don't really know how to cultivate and build the external influence that the new world demands. And so every time that these episodes are shared, it will expose them to the signals that they need to develop in order to be able to lead better. So I appreciate you being willing to do that. So I want to start with something that might make a few people uncomfortable. And that is that some of the most powerful people inside of STEM companies are also the least competent. Now, why do I say that they are the least competent? Because they're the least visible. And that's not a coincidence. I think that that is a leadership blind spot because right now, technical leaders, whether they're CTOs, heads of product, engineering leaders, they all represent the single biggest untapped credibility opportunity inside of organizations today. And not because they lack authority, not because they lack expertise, obviously, they're brilliant individuals, but because their credibility is trapped internally when the market is forming trust externally. And that disconnect, it's costing companies more than they realize. Here's what I mean. Most leaders, they were trained for an era where influence lived inside the building, right? Like you managed your team, you executed strategy, you delivered results. And if you did that well, your credibility was clear and your credibility was secure. But that world just doesn't exist anymore. That's not the world that we are currently in today. Companies are judged before anyone ever walks through the door. Investors, they're forming opinions before earnings calls. Talent decides whether to apply before a recruiter reaches out or before they find your job posting. Customers decide whether they trust you before they ever talk to anybody in the sales department, before they ever see a piece of marketing. And all of that happens externally, in public, in digital spaces, through what leaders signal or don't. Now, here's where technical leaders come in. I see this all the time. Technical leaders often hold the deepest truth and the deepest trust inside of an organization. Why? Because they understand what's actually being built. They know what's possible, what's fragile, and what's coming next. They're closest to innovation, risk, and future facing decisions. And yet, they are almost always trained to stay heads down, to be precise, to be correct, to avoid speculation, to let the business speak for themselves, to let the business speak for them, which that worked beautifully in the old leadership model. But in today's influence economy, that silence, it reads as absence. Absence reads as uncertainty, and uncertainty erodes trust. And you just can't afford that because here's the hard truth that most companies don't want to say out loud. When your most credible leaders are invisible, the company's authority weakens, not internally, externally. And the losses show up everywhere. Lower investor confidence, slower customer conversion, a thinner talent pipeline. And again, not because the company isn't strong, but because the signals aren't. And this is what I call the leadership competency gap. And it's not a skills gap, it's a signal gap. Technical leaders, they're developed to lead internally with intention, but almost never develop to communicate externally with the same care. They're taught how to ship, scale, optimize, execute, but they're not taught how to represent the company publicly, translate complexity into confidence, articulate a point of view about the future, signal stability in moments of uncertainty. So marketing fills the gap, PR fills the gap, comms give you talking points to fill the gap that really just makes you sound like a robot. And while those functions matter, they can't replace leadership presence. The marketing, the PR, the comms, even the technology that you're building cannot replace and replicate leadership presence because credibility borrowed from branding is always weaker than credibility embodied by leaders. I'm going to say that again. Credibility borrowed by branding or borrowed from branding. Let me say that again. Credibility borrowed from branding is always weaker than credibility embodied by leaders. And let me be very clear here because this is where people get it wrong. This is not about personal branding, right? Like, I'm not asking you to turn your engineers into influencers. I'm not asking for your CTO to start posting just for the sake of visibility. This is about leadership infrastructure. It's about recognizing that in today's economy, external influence is part of the job. Not an add on, not a nice to have, not something that you get to later, not something that you think is not important because you've got a strong product. It is baseline leadership performance. Think about it this way: when a technical leader speaks clearly about what's being built, what it means, where it's going, it does something no marketing campaign does, because quite frankly they can find all that on the website, right? And they probably have. It reduces uncertainty. It creates confidence without hype. It signals competence and stability at the same time. That's rare and it's powerful. But here's the problem: most technical leaders, they don't speak publicly because they're never trained to. They were rewarded for accuracy, but not resonance, rewarded for depth, not translation, for caution, not clarity. So when they do show up externally, because that is part of the job now, very seldom is it just the founder or just the marketing or comms people that are being seen publicly. So when they do show up externally, it often feels uncomfortable, over edited, over technical. And then companies conclude, see, they're not cut out for this. When in reality, they were just never developed for it. This is where the biggest opportunity lives. Because when you help technical leaders learn how to communicate externally as leaders, not marketers, everything changes. They don't need to simplify their thinking, they need to contextualize it. They don't need to become louder, they need to become more clear. They don't need to predict the future, they need to articulate how they are thinking about it. Let me give you a simple reframe. Internal leadership is about decision making power, but external leadership is about trust building power. And in today's market, trust building power is what moves everything else. So, what does this actually look like in practice? It looks like teaching leaders how to explain complex work in a way that creates confidence instead of confusion. It's about leaders being taught how to speak about risk without triggering fear, how to share progress without overpromising, how to hold a visible point of view about the future that signals direction, not perfection. Meaning, what the heck do they think about where the industry and where it's headed? Not only just what the company stands for or the features of their product. How to show up consistently enough that stakeholders recognize them as steady presence. Now, notice what I didn't say. I didn't say go viral. I didn't say build a massive following. I didn't say post every day, because this is not about volume, it's about intention. When technical leaders communicate externally with intention, three things happen. First, the company gains authority because credibility isn't abstract anymore, it's embodied by the people building the future. Second, the market feels safer because uncertainty shrinks when leaders explain what's happening in real language, like real human language, not technical jargon. And third, trust compounds because consistency beats perfection every single time. And this is why companies that invest in this now will lead the next era. And companies that ignore it, they will spend the next decade trying to explain why trust keeps slipping away and making it easy for their competitors to poach their customers and their top talent. If you're listening to this as a technical leader, I want you to hear this clearly. Your silence is not neutral, it's interpreted. And you don't need to become someone else to show up. You just need support translating what you already know into signals the outside world can read. And if you're listening as an executive, a founder, or board member, this is your opportunity. The credibility you're looking for isn't missing, it's just locked inside the wrong rooms. External influence is no longer an advantage, it's the baseline. And the leaders who understand that, especially the technical ones, will define what credibility looks like next. Because influence isn't visibility, it's trust. And trust is built by leaders who are willing to be seen thinking out loud with clarity, responsibility, and intention. That's where the real leverage is. And that's the opportunity most companies are still missing. That's the shift. Not more visibility, not more noise, just leaders who are willing to be seen thinking clearly in public arenas. That's where credibility is headed. If you want help with this inside of your company, message me and we will hop on the phone and figure it out. But in the meantime, I want you to share this episode with all of the technical leaders or those that are responsible for leading and developing them. I hope that you will go back and listen to previous and future episodes as well. Have a good day. Bye bye.